I didn't identify what I was experiencing as burnout. I just thought, oh, I need a change. I need a change. I need a change.
Are you ready to reclaim your life from exhaustion and expand the possibilities of what life can be? If so, I'm your guide, Evelyn.Energy, work-life geek and engineer-turned-resiliency coach on a mission to redefine how we work, live, and utilize our energy. Each episode, I dig deep with my guests as they share their story, spark, and strategies for developing our own unique work-life blend. This is Engineering Serenity. Episode 1. Coaching, Therapy, and Rattlesnakes. Oh my! With Jennifer Jim. Hello and welcome to Engineering Serenity.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm so excited you're here. So to get us started today, I'm going to ask you a few basic questions so that we get to know you better.
That sounds good. I'm ready.
First off, what is your name?
My name's Jennifer Jim.
What is your age-ish?
I'll be very specific, 46.
What industry do you work in?
I am a health coach.
What does that mean specifically? What kind of health?
Thank you for asking. Mental health, to be specific. So I'm a former mental health therapist turned health coach, specifically working with anxiety and stress.
How many hours do you work typically per week?
For my coaching business, I work about 16 hours a week.
Okay. Do you like your career?
Yes, I love it.
Do you have a history of burnout?
Yes, I do. Although in the moment of it, I didn't realize that's what I was experiencing. But it led me to pack up my entire household and move from Milwaukee, Wisconsin to Portland, Oregon.
Are you willing to share more about that experience with us now?
Absolutely. I would love to. I'll tell you the story. I was a mental health therapist and I was working in community mental health. For anybody who's familiar with that, it's really working with people with severe and persistent mental illness. And it's a lot of work. It was hard work. And I'd been working at the same place for about 7 years. I'd moved up. I was the supervisor of the team. And it's just a lot of hard work with not a lot of resources. And I didn't identify what I was experiencing as burnout. I just thought, oh, I need a change. I need a change. I need a change. And I started looking for jobs and was offered a lovely new position out in Portland, Oregon. And so I just had to pack up and move across country. And I even had been a little bit self-blaming that I wasn't able to continue to do that job, that I was wanting a change or that I didn't enjoy it as much as I used to, when it was what I had gone to school to be. It was what I wanted to do. And then I wasn't enjoying it. And then I'm driving a U-Haul across the country and we stop in Wyoming and Montana. And if you've ever been in those states in the United States, there's a lot of wide open nothingness. And so we stop at a rest stop that has all of these signs that say, beware the rattlesnakes, beware of rattlesnakes. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is kind of unnerving. And then I don't know why, but looking at that sign of the rattlesnake and the rattle at the end of the snake, my brain went, oh, I'm burnt out. Right? Like,
that seems like a big jump.
It is, because I was looking at it and I thought, oh, I'm afraid like that rattle is a scary sound. But then I was like, wait, we don't need to be afraid of the rattle. We need to be afraid of the snake bite, right? That it is a poisonous snake. But the rattle, we hear that in advance and it makes us get scared. And I thought, oh, what I've been experiencing is like the precursors to burnout. But I had been blaming myself, or I'd been afraid or frustrated with the wrong thing. And what I really needed to be afraid of or pay attention to was that I was headed towards burnout. And I know it's like, how did my brain do that? I don't know. But it was like this, like, oh, I totally understand what's happening to me now. And I even work in the field of mental health. But when it's yourself, it is a different experience. So I always think about rattlesnakes now, of just am I actually paying attention to the right thing? The rattle isn't the worry. It's the venom is the problem, right? The burnout.
Looking back before you left the job and before you got to the rattlesnake sign, what kind of symptoms were you having? How was it showing up for you?
It showed up a lot in that things I used to take a lot of pride in or felt really good about doing in my job, I felt kind of laissez-faire about them. I was kind of like doing the minimum. I didn't not do my job. I hadn't gotten that far down the path of burnout that I've now seen other people reach, but I didn't do it to the level of um, really striving for perfection, which I had done for so long. Is I started to not care. I started to just kind of do what needed to be done, and that's about it. And I also realized that I was being slower around getting things done that otherwise would have been done. And I would let things pile up, which was only contributing further and further to the burnout, right? Now I saw this huge pile of things I needed to do. And so it was really just the lack of follow through, caring less about the work I was doing, and just taking forever to do things that really could have taken me 5 minutes.
When you started recovering from the burnout, did your enthusiasm towards the mental health industry come back?
It did, although there was this nagging kind of question in the back of my mind. I took a position in Portland, Oregon, also in the mental health field, and continued to work in that for, let's see, another 10 years. So it's not that I left the field, although I did not go back to direct service for a while of doing the therapy. I stayed in leadership and management. I launched a new program, right? Like I stayed in a different space, although still connected to mental health. But I just had this little nagging question about this work is so much work, but not enough resources. And that was just kind of the cross section for me that had really led to the burnout.
Hmm, interesting. Did you have any physical symptoms as well?
Headaches. After the fact, I realized, gosh, I just was having headaches consistently. And then I moved to Portland and I was like, oh my gosh, it must be the air here. I feel so good. I don't have headaches. And then I thought, oh no, actually, I think that probably was coming from the stress I was experiencing and the tension. Um, that, yeah, great air in the Pacific Northwest. But I think actually it was the burnout that really led to a relief of that symptom. And the other was, of course, dread.
Oh, dread?
Dread. I felt like that's not a physical, but that kind of sinking feeling associated with dread on a Sunday night. I experienced a lot of that as well.
Ooh. Yeah, that's something that fear of returning to work, that's something I recognize from my past as well. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
one that it sort of gets mentioned, but dread is a really good way to describe that.
Yeah, that feeling of please don't make me go back there again for another week of work.
Yeah, seriously. So you got to the Pacific Northwest and you were still working in the mental health industry and your energy was coming back, but you were really diversifying what you were doing, but staying within the area of interest and passion that you had. But you said that the issue of having a lot of work and not enough resources was continuing to come up. What did that insight lead to? How did this experience of burning out and being able to recognize that these were the triggers lead to the next step in your adventures?
Yeah, great question. So, kind of butting up against that, work without resource, also along that same vein of just the access, help, and the services that we were providing as an industry. And that so much of the information and the tools that I was helping people with as a therapist, they are great for people who have a diagnosis of mental health disorder, but they also are great for literally anybody. And I began to think about how many hoops and layers there were for people to get access to some really basic health information. I specifically say health information, not mental health information, because our brains are in our bodies. It really is truly about our health. that when we go to school, right, we learn the food pyramid, or we learn personal hygiene, or we learn all of these physical things, but that so many of us were not learning anything about our mental health. That led me to ultimately leaving my role as a mental health therapist to be a health coach, so that I can bring those tools to people without them having to receive a formal diagnosis or going through insurance providers that have a lot of requirements. Therapy is really highly regulated, rightly so. I understand why it is. Coaching isn't. And so someone like me who's coming with all of these years of experience, almost 2 decades, I can teach and guide and provide tools that really serve anyone.
So, as someone with 20 years of experience in mental health therapy who's now doing mental health coaching, maybe you do both, I don't know. Where's the line? What is the difference between therapy and coaching? And how do you keep those worlds separate when therapy, as you said, is a really regulated process? And you said rightly so. Why is it such a regulated process, yet you feel so comfortable sharing those tools in the coaching world?
That's a great question. Yeah, there's some fundamental differences. I could probably talk about this forever and ever, but for me, there's really three big differences between coaching and therapy. And the first is training. That a therapist minimally has a master's degree in a field of social work, therapy, counseling, psychology, and coaching is really more lived experience. Um, and then that leads to how they help. And this is where the regulation shows up for therapists, is that they're really operating in a medical model where they're diagnosing, creating a treatment plan, and then really working on healing wounds, right? Healing inner wounds and really getting at the origin of issues for people. And that can be very difficult for people to do. It can bring up a lot of stuff. It can even be dangerous depending on what that stirs up. And we want somebody to have the adequate training to know how to respond to crisis and support, and then also coordinate with a medical team if needed. And so that's why the formal regulations are there, right? And it also really focuses in on the client, and the therapist is really held back from sharing their own experience. Switching over to coaching it's really more focused on here and now, and it's really on specific goals for people. So maybe it's a career development, or maybe it's improving relationships, or learning how to manage stress. It is not regulated because it isn't about going back and healing wounds. It's about identifying outcomes, changes, shifts, growth that someone wants to have, and helping them create a plan of how to get there. And the access then, of course, is really different too. And any therapist who accepts insurance, it does require a diagnosis that shows medical necessity. And that was
Mm.
one of the big pieces that led me to decide to step outside of therapy and do mental health coaching, is that there is a lot of steps and a lot of regulations on top of the field that come from insurance. And I saw a lot of people who were struggling with not having the right tools, but they weren't going to meet a diagnosis that met medical necessity.
I was actually thinking about that in terms of medical necessity with burnout. When you're in the precursors to burnout, which is when you want to be having help and you want to be getting the right tools, and even in a state of burnout, when does it count as being a medical necessity? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I now live in the Netherlands and I was identified at my office as potential burnout, sent to the company doctor, and then sent on medical leave. And that is an infrastructure that just is not something that I recognize from the US, let alone like if you had the self awareness to know that you could be burning out, how would you know? When is it medically necessary?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is a diagnostic manual that is used by anybody who's providing diagnoses in the mental health field. that there are very specific criteria outlined for, say, depression, anxiety, any mental health diagnosis that somebody has to meet. An assessment has to be done and written proving how that person meets those criteria, and then submitted to insurance to be able to be paid for. So it is really, like I said, a really highly regulated, structured system. It really, mental health is like specialty medicine. If you think about like going to a cardiologist, right? Like they're going to do their assessment and treat it. Mental health is similar to that, but we don't think about it in that way, right?
Oh,
There's
but
a
it
lot
makes
of behind the
sense.
scenes. Yeah.
It makes sense that there would be because there is an official diagnosis for burnout versus depression or stress or anxiety. There is a clear distinction in the diagnosis manuals for those, correct?
Yeah, burnout isn't a diagnosed
Oh,
mental disorder, right? Anxiety is, depression is, and I think burnout can lead to those, right? If we do not address it. And burnout comes from prolonged exposure to stress. And so certainly put somebody in a vulnerable position to experience the symptoms of a mental health disorder, but it not necessarily. And that's why I really wanted to kind of move into that place and say, hey, we don't need to wait until it
yeah.
is so bad that you need now medical model treatment. Is, can I teach you some things? Can I provide you some support and guidance that may help you to dial back on that burnout, recover from it, or prevent it from happening altogether?
So, what are the areas that get you excited now? What are the areas that you love to specialize in and help?
Yes. Well, I didn't mention that my very, very first career before I went back and got my master's to be a therapist, I was a biochemist. I worked in a laboratory doing research on breast cancer. And I jokingly say I wasn't good for the lab because I talk too much. There are other reasons too, but I really still am. I really geek out on the brain, and I provide a lot of information about the brain to the people I work with, probably more so than other coaches, because you can take the girl out of the lab, but you can't really take the lab out of the girl. Is that I really love science. And so I specialize in working with women in the STEM field. A lot of the individuals who come to see me work in that field. I'm open to other professionals and do work with other women, but that specialty and that understanding of that world has really been fun for me to be able to support those women.
So, if the audience wants to learn more about you and what do you do, what's the best way to learn more?
Yeah, visit my website. It is www.coachjengym, that's just JIM, jengym.com.
Wonderful. Thank you. To wrap up today's session, I'm going to ask you the final 5 questions I ask all of my guests. Are you ready?
I am ready. Bring it on.
What is your definition of wellness?
Ooh, definition of wellness. That when we are well, we are able to take on anything that comes our way and handle it and enjoy life, even with its ups and downs.
Sometimes it can feel upside down as well, though.
Yes, again.
What is your favorite method to recharge during the workday?
Coffee. I am a very big coffee drinker, and I love to go get a warm cup of coffee and then hold it in my hands for a minute before I take a sip.
If you could master one skill instantly, what would it be?
Dancing. I've always wished I could be a really beautiful dancer. Does not come naturally to me, and I would love to be a beautiful dancer.
Any specific type of dance?
No, actually, just being able to listen to music and be able to respond easily.
Oh. What are you geeking out about right now?
I am geeking out on polyvagal theory, which is really looking at our nervous system. And I've been doing a lot of reading about breath work and polyvagal work.
Oh, breath work. That's one of the areas that I definitely want to explore in my future. It's so powerful.
It really is.
Now I have to look into polyvagal as well. Imagine a world where you've achieved the optimal work life blend. Describe your typical day.
Yes. Well, I would be able to wake up, spend some time with my daughter before she heads out to school. And then I would head off and be able to go to the gym and do a workout. I go to a boxing gym actually. I go do my circuit, come home, be able to see my clients both individually and lead a group, pick up my daughter from school, bring her home, have dinner with my family, and really be able to enjoy all of those just basic things stress free.
Mm. The way you're describing it, it sounds like it's closer to reality than it is a dream.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And
Mm.
that was my goal. So I'm very pleased to say, yes, that is very close to the reality that I'm living right now.
Is it something that you intentionally set your mind in order to find this work life blend and define it this way?
Yes, it was really intentional. I was a really late in life mom, and I wanted to be able to spend time more with my family than with my work.
Hmm. How long did you say it took you to transition from sort of that more traditional model of life to something that's more balanced like you have today?
It probably took me, honestly, like the whole first year that I made the transition to slow down. I kept having feelings like, oh, I should be doing something, or there's something I'm missing, or shouldn't this be more complex? And it was almost like I just had to shed that nervous energy and that really fast pace. I'm still really busy. People will say, like, oh, it must be nice not to be busy. And it's like, oh, I'm busy. I have many things going on in my life. It's that I'm not rushing and having that kind of frenetic pace that I had. But yeah, it was probably a whole year before I finally felt okay with the pace that I have now.
I think that's a really good expectation to set, not only to that. And this seems to be like once you actually made the transition to having the space and not working a full time 40-hour commitment, that it took then another year in order to get that pacing right, let alone the amount of time it
Yes.
took you before you even got to the point where you made that transition.
Uh yeah. Well, I hadn't that's a good question. I'm not sure how long it took me to get to that point. I guess I'm gonna say my whole career now. 17 years. No. Probably the last 5 leading up to it probably was when I started thinking about doing something different. But it wasn't until it was like once I finally realized what I wanted to do in terms of coaching, then it was fairly quick.
Hmm. Oh, that's fun. So it was almost this is me making an assumption. Was the idea that you wanted a more balanced work life combination, which allowed you to be with your daughter, that sort of led to the idea of thinking about coaching?
Yes, I think so. I think that it was when I thought about how can I use my skills in a different way that would allow me more time with my daughter and family. I realized that I had the skills to be able to do coaching. And then that also mirrored what I was already feeling in terms of, boy, there's a lot of barriers to get to the help that people need. And so when I kind of connected those, it was like, aha, this is what I should do. And then that was really quick turnaround for me to say, okay, let me do this. And I started the business.
Oh, it's amazing when all the sort of pieces, just the things that you've been thinking about and the other wishes that you've been having and the barriers, all of a sudden those things that you thought were barriers and were driving you crazy are actually the insights, the indications.
Yes. Yeah, it's like a puzzle, right? You're just like putting all the pieces together, but you don't actually have the image of what the puzzle is supposed to look like, right? And then it's finally you get a piece in there where you're like, oh, I see it. I can see the image here.
That is a beautiful image. That's what I'm going to keep. Thank you for that. Well,
Yeah.
I've had a wonderful conversation today and definitely learned a lot about not only coaching, but also the difference between therapy. And for example, apparently burnout is not actually a clinical diagnosis.
No, it is not. It is very real and it has a very real definition, but it is not a diagnosis in the diagnostic manual for therapy.
Interesting. But as we wrap up, what is the one thing you want the audience to take away from our conversation today?
The thing I would like for all of you to take away from today is that you've got options and there isn't a right or a wrong path. That maybe it's therapy, maybe it's coaching, maybe it's both, that you get to choose what feels supportive for you and that you don't have to wait until it's really bad to reach out. Don't wait till you're fully burnt out. Reach out now.
Intrigued or inspired by today's episode, but forgot the details? Don't worry, I've got you covered. Visit engineeringserenity.com for a complete summary of today's episode, including timestamps, links, and other resources for your adventure. Wishing you strength and serenity, Evelyn out.